Okay, we're just negotiating our responses here on the final panel. So I get to be the moderator, which is great because Vangelis has said it all. I thought that was a fantastic input. I find myself in furious agreement with pretty much everything, which is troubling for a moderator, I have to say. But fortunately, I have a great panel who can take this forward. So maybe, Debbie, I'll start with you. In terms of those three scenarios that Vangelis sketched out, the golden weather is over scenario, the rising regionalism combined with global fragmentation scenario, and the WTO minus X, which I took to be the plurilaterals scenario. Where do you think we're headed in that spectrum of scenarios? And maybe drawing on your pottery metaphor, I think I have a sense of where you take that. Yeah.
Well, I would say the middle one seems to me to be the most plausible in the near term. But I think it's crucial to plan for the first scenario, which is the, holy cow, Armageddon kind of a mess. Because if you're not thinking now about what does the world look like if it's even more disrupted than it's already been, then you're going to be caught out once more. I think a lot of us in this room, I'm guessing, anticipated some challenges when Trump came back into office, but my guess is that most people didn't anticipate the depth, the speed, the complexity of the changes from the US and the way in which the rest of the world would respond or perhaps not respond to those threats. And so I would argue that having missed this vision before, we don't want to do it twice. So thinking again about what if it gets worse is, I think, a valuable exercise, and then trying to say, well, if that were to happen, here's what we'll do. That especially should spur you to be much more like, how do we make the second scenario more likely? And then potentially, how do we then pivot at some point in the future to a more benign, maybe that's a WTO minus, I don't know what that third one is, but slightly less bad over the longer term.
Great, thanks, Debbie. So I'm making this up as I go along, but let me pose a question to you, Sara, and I wouldn't expect you to disagree with Vangelis, obviously, but maybe to amplify a little bit. So the second scenario, rising regionalism, global fragmentation, is kind of a play on an old building blocks versus stumbling blocks that we used to debate back in the 80s and 90s. So free trade agreements, do they build the multilateral system or do they undermine it? And that's quite an interesting thematic, given what's happening in Melbourne this week, and particularly for those that don't know, the CPTPP members meeting, the ASEAN's coming, the EU conversation, the EU Commissioner will be in Melbourne for that meeting. And that's about a regional trade agreement looking to build the multilateral system. But at least to preserve it, I suppose, or what's possibly left of it in the wake of reciprocal tariffs. But what are your thoughts and your expectations for that particular set of conversations? Or what could come out of that if you're able to enlighten us? Yeah.
Yeah, kia ora koutou, and thank you for an excellent, rich day of discussion. New Zealand has always subscribed to these FTAs and regional agreements as building upon the WTO's mutually supportive and I guess a demonstration of what could be achieved if there was the political will to be more ambitious in the multilateral context. So the idea was always a complement rather than a competition, if you like. Our hope for this week is that, together the CPTPP countries with the EU, with ASEAN, we make up a huge proportion of the world, of global trade, of the global population. I think our hope is to deliver a message that resonates, that we still subscribe. We still believe in what the WTO membership was trying to create 30-odd years or so ago. And if you'll allow me, I do want to take a moment to reflect on that and what a huge undertaking it was, but the results of that effort. Over the last 30 years, the WTO has helped lift 1 billion people out of extreme poverty, millions of jobs by opening markets and lowering barriers. And then there's some less kind of sexy headlines, but absolutely fundamental, you know, the improved consumer safety, while limiting protectionism through the technical barriers to trade and sanitary and photosanitary agreements, the promotion of innovation and public health through the TRIPS agreement, enabling over $3 trillion in duty-free trade in tech via the Information Technology Agreement, cutting trade costs, especially for developing countries, through the Trade Facilitations and Customs Valuation Agreement, providing vital technical assistance and capacity building to support integration into global trade, and resolving over 600 disputes as a real demonstration of country buy-in to this rules-based system. And I wanted to make sure to capture that because it's sometimes easy to overlook. The Director General of the WTO calls these pieces of the infrastructure the plumbing of the system. And just like plumbing, you don't really notice it until it's not there, and then you bloody notice it. So it feels like, from New Zealand's perspective, everything we will be working toward is around protecting that, defending that, building on it, reforming it. To me, it means more WTO rather than less, speaking to your point earlier, Deborah, but it's a challenge, and I have to kind of, as Vangela said, in sorrow rather than anger, concede that it probably won't look the way it has, and we need to adapt to that, and I think these plurilateral engagements, initiatives like the dialogues with ASEAN, with the EU, are all designed to keep what we have and to build on it and continue this development.
Great. So, Debbie, thinking about that a little bit, so the US has or is in the process of appointing an ambassador to the WTO. I don't think, and it has one now. Okay, so that's interesting, right? Yeah. Given everything they're doing otherwise to blow up the system, so they haven't left the system yet. They could vote to do that. I think that window has passed now for the next 5 years, but I could be wrong on the details. So they're retaining a foothold in the system while undermining it systematically. It's a very interesting posture. But where does that leave the rest of the membership in terms of anchoring the system, looking to shore it up for the future through ventures like the EU, CPTPP, ASEAN dialogue, etc., and I guess through plurilaterals. And the plurilaterals are really interesting because this used to be the GATS modality, plurilaterals, and in a sense, we're going back to the future. It's just that the plurilaterals look different in a different context. So history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. There's a lot in that, Debbie, but what do you think?
Yeah, there was a lot in there. You know, if you said, let's just imagine, sake of argument, we all said, never mind on all that we've had so far, get out a blank piece of paper, let's design the system from scratch today. We would surely design it differently than we did at the end of World War II when the original GATT was created. We would design it differently than we did in 1995 when the GATT became the World Trade Organization. We would all create, I'm assuming, a sort of different structure. But even within this room, given the number of people in this room, my guess is that we would all probably, there would be a few things that would be in common, but there would be an awful lot of things on our list that would be not in common, or that would be maybe complementary, maybe contradictory in some cases, but we would have an awfully hard time, even if it was just all of us in this room, designing a system that we felt was fit for purpose for today and going forward. And I think that points to the challenge that we're in, which is we have this existing set of rules, norms of behavior, legally binding commitments that most countries have undertaken. They are backed up by a suite, depending on where you are, but a suite of other things that build on those rules. And the idea that you would somehow throw them all out and start from scratch is just nonsensical. That, first of all, it would be difficult to do or impossible to do, and there's a lot that's been invested in what's already been done. And so I think we are in this interesting space of trying to salvage as much as possible what does work, what has been working, and then again, being creative around the margins to be able to figure out how do you create a system that works best for, well, starting domestic level, New Zealand, and then moving up to a region, moving to global, et cetera, because that is the most sensible and practical way to do this. We just don't have the luxury of being able to say, take a piece of paper out and let's start over from scratch. I don't think that's realistic. But it is complicated, right? How do you preserve this? And I think even just to start, because you asked me about the US to start, I think even the United States, now maybe not Trump himself, but other people in the US, has not completely gone off the rails, just to be clear. Not every American has lost their marbles. So some of them recognize that, wait a second, actually this is an institution that the United States is going to want to be back in. I mean, they're going to want to stay in this. They're still going to want to shape it. They're still going to want to be part of it. Maybe not today, as in literally today, but maybe next week, maybe 3 weeks from now, maybe 6 weeks from, we don't know when it will be, but let's not pull out and start from scratch because that would be nonsensical. So I think even the United States, with all the crazy that we're dealing with out of the White House, has this recognition that you don't get the luxury of starting over. You start with the thing that you have and you try to figure out how to adapt it. So you keep the WTO going as much as you can, and then you sort of buttress it, I guess was the way I would argue, with all these other initiatives that hopefully reinforce the WTO. But there is obviously a risk that the more we do things outside of the WTO, the more you undermine both the WTO and potentially, and I think this is a growing problem, commitments you've made elsewhere. So we always say that you can sign all of these different agreements and not to worry because they're all complementary and none of them ever conflict with one another. First of all, I'm not certain that that's true in the past, and I'm definitely not sure it'll be true in the future, where I can very easily imagine countries will sign agreements, maybe because they're coerced, maybe because they didn't recognize the danger, I don't know, and they could become conflictual with one another. And that risk grows, which is why we wanted, among other things, to have the World Trade Organization working. Because that limited the amount of conflict, confusion, fragmentation that we were going to have.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. That was a pretty comprehensive answer. Maybe, Sara, turning to New Zealand's strategy. So Vangelis outlined 4 elements, if I got them down correctly. So diversification of risk, free trade agreements, other agreements as well, sectoral, for instance. Maximizing existing FTA benefits, the implementation agenda. I'm curious about uptake of existing agreements, actually, so maybe if you've got a comment on that. Then doubling down on how to support exporters internationally makes a lot of sense. Australia has set up through the Australian Trade and Investment Commission a trade diversification task force, which is quite an interesting and fairly new initiative that seems to have traction, I would say, so certainly judging from business uptake and engagement with it. And then keep on innovating. And he mentioned a few elements of that, avoiding the Einstellung effect, taking calculated risks, building norms, and this is where I wanted to come out. So, particularly in relation to the FIT-P, which is pretty new, and I'm really curious about the thinking behind that in relation to the group of countries that's coming together to support it. So how does it work? How do you take this back into the WTO, whatever the FIT-P countries can agree on? Because I think that is ultimately the core focus of the FIT-P. But am I wrong on that?
No, from the outset, I think all the participating countries in the FIT-P have been really explicit about its complementary nature to the WTO and WTO objectives. And I mean, I think when it was first launched, actually the Director General of the WTO was invited to speak at that launch as well, which speaks to that. The FIT-P is going to be a project-based type of initiative. There are already some projects on the agenda. The kind of furthest developed one is around supply chains. So really real world, grounded in some of the comments that we heard today around how businesses are trying to navigate the complexity and uncertainty that they're dealing with. And I think the membership is quite distinctive, actually. You're looking at quite small, generally small countries, but countries that are keen to work together to do something in the context of a very complex dynamic amongst the major economies. And so I think there's a great deal of hope that this will be something that's constructive, that adds to the trade policy agenda in a way that is supportive of the rules-based system, but sits alongside. It is not in any way looking to be undercutting the WTO agenda, if you like. In relation to your question around implementation, New Zealand always saw the FTAs that we've pursued as sitting on top of the WTO rules. As it happens, it now feels like they're a bit of a safety net, which was never actually the primary driver for them, but there you go, here we are. In theory, they cover around 70% of New Zealand's trade, but that question around uptake and their use is fundamental. And so I think it's fair to say we still have work to do, and it's a preoccupation for us. How do we inform businesses of the access that these agreements give? Prior to this role, which I took up in February, so it's been a hell of a time. But prior to this role, I was based in Mexico, and I was our ambassador there, and Mexico, of course, is a CPTPP country. We have had this agreement in place since 2018, and it came to light, actually, that our seafood industry was not utilizing the tariff preferences that CPTPP provided, and so paying a tariff unnecessarily, and that feels like, money that could be in their pockets. So I think implementation and then uptake. Are we providing businesses with the tools needed to understand the environment? A great emphasis around intelligence sharing, on the ground market operating context. And of course, speaking to comments made earlier, enforcement if it's not working the way it should be. And the non-tariff barrier agenda is a huge part of that.
Great. So the Conference of the Parties, the members of the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, are meeting in Belém, in Brazil, as we speak. The US, of course, again, the US, we're always talking about the US, but there we go, has pulled out of the Paris Agreement. One of the big controversies in Belém, as I understand it, is the interaction between trade-related climate measures, dare I say things like carbon border adjustment mechanisms, amongst other things, and the environmental agenda. And now New Zealand, with its innovative approach to trade strategy, you've come up with the ACCTS, the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability, which has built into it a very interesting fossil fuel subsidies element amongst others. Can you tell us a little bit more about it and the thinking behind it and where you're going with it?
Yeah, happy to. So the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability is another example of New Zealand working very closely with a group of very small countries. It's New Zealand, Switzerland, Costa Rica and Iceland. And it has several dimensions to it, but I think the most innovative one and the trickiest one is certainly around the fossil fuel subsidy chapter. And this chapter tries to design restrictions around fossil fuel subsidy use. Now, this really speaks to a huge challenge we have in the climate change space, where billions, and in fact now $1 trillion, is being spent by government to either toward fossil fuel production or fossil fuel consumption. And in the context of talking about putting a price on carbon, this is just policy incoherence at its worst. And so we were reflecting, I think, on the role that trade policy tools can play in support of a climate change objective. And this is what we have, I guess, offered by way of a demonstration of what rules around this, serious rules around this could look like. Fossil fuel subsidies were first talked about by the G20 in 2009. And since then, year after year, there's commitment. We will reduce, we must address. It's just spiraled out of control. And, you're talking when the X initiative was first launched, I think the fossil fuel subsidy spending was around $500 billion. It is now over $1 trillion. And so this feels really urgent. It feels really important. But I tell you, it hasn't had as much uptake as we would have liked. There's still the four of us, we're still it's early days. There's a lot of interest, I think, from some countries around, where are we going with this? But I have a hope that, the political climate has to evolve a wee bit, but this is a policy offering by way of kind of innovative rule design that could have a real world impact if countries get serious about this issue.
Kudos to MFAT for that initiative. It's a fantastic one. We've got about 3 minutes left. Debbie, any final thoughts?
Well, I don't know if this is a final thought, but it's a thought. So I was thinking as she was talking about, this climate change initiative, to me is an example of what Vangelis was talking about taking risks. So this is an initiative that is new, is unusual. It doesn't fit within the WTO framework as such. It's clearly addressing a set of challenges that New Zealand feels deeply. It's gone out and found partners to try to persuade them to join. It could turn out splendidly. It could really multiply into something amazing. It could get a lot of other traction. It might not. At which point there will be complaints, because I'm sure there will already be people who will say, well, that's a huge waste of resources. What were you thinking? But I would say, hey, this is the kind of forward-leaning policy making that is absolutely vital, that very few places can do. And so, the question I got from my Hinrich Foundation about why would I come to this particular meeting and why would I come to this week in New Zealand was because I said, look, this is where I think innovation genuinely does happen. And I think ATEPS in particular for me, I said this last year, I'm saying it again, is super interesting because it brings together a diverse audience with, young and old, different groups of people to raise all kinds of input around policy making that is not traditional, is not done elsewhere. Nobody else sings, let me just say. As far as I'm aware, there's no other government that comes together and sings with people, and you've done it twice today. It's been delightful. I think that kind of, again, for me, it's that sort of, risk taking. It's the collective community. It's the how do we work together? Because we're small. You're not going to make it if you don't sort of think about leveraging the strengths of everybody in that community in a way that I personally find very empowering and inspiring. And it doesn't always pay off, just to be clear, that is a risk. But I think it is a risk that has to be taken because the alternative, particularly for a small country like New Zealand, is really bad. So in a world of great disruption, that on a trade-dependent economy, thank heavens you've got smart people who are thinking ahead about how do we make ourselves relevant, how do we get in the room, and how do we stay in the room. So this, for me, is a perfect illustration of what that looks like in practice.
Right, Sara?
Well, just to say, I think, and underlined by some of the achievements of the WTO, trade policy to me is around people, development, fairness, and inclusion. And I think there's a real sense of New Zealand that we are believers in this system, and we want to contribute to it. And as Vangela said, be in the room. The context has changed, and the ground continues to shift on us, and we can't control that. So it's around navigating the uncertainty and the volatility. We do need to internalize it, both government and business, but not let it paralyze us.
Please join me in thanking our panel, our concluding panel. Last words from the organisers.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you so much for a great closing panel looking to the future and what we would do again, or not. We've come to the end of our annual Trade and Economic Policy School, ATEPS. It's been wonderful to be together here on campus at Waipapa Taumatarau. And as I mentioned this morning, the point of our school is to learn from our experts, from our distinguished visitors, and from each other. And I think we've achieved that and some over the past 8 hours together through both the formal panel sessions and over coffee and kai. But events like this don't happen by themselves, so before we close in advance of our final networking event, when you will have to all get up, go outside for 5 minutes while we run around and set up some bar tables for you, and then you can come back in again. So our work isn't quite done. The important stuff is still to come, but there are quite a few people I want to thank. So first to our speakers and chairs, there are 20 of you today. We very much appreciate you taking the time out from your very busy schedules, and in some cases, like the case of Blanche, who've travelled very far, 5 hours in a car, just to get here, 5 hours back again, tomorrow or the next day, whenever. But still, that's pretty impressive, to share with us knowledge, insights and challenges for us to work towards, and to think differently about the barriers and opportunities that come with geopolitical disruptions and the realities of the new and sometimes unpredictable use of tariffs. And how much did we learn today? What? A lot, I think. So a very special thanks to our international visitors for travelling here to be with us. Deb and Peter, it's really been great to host you, and we hope to see you again in future years. Second, thank you very much to our participatory audience, our group of MFAT grads, our MFAT Manaaki short course scholars from across the ASEAN region, our distinguished visitors, dignitaries from consulates and embassies, the range of business, government and non-government professionals, researchers and consultants. Thank you again for joining us, for sharing your questions. You are critical to ensuring that this is, there you go, this is. I'll let you fill that in over a drink. I don't know what happened to my little typing bit there. So third, to MFAT in Wellington for their continued support, especially to Sara, Claire, Vangeli, who I have to say, I don't know if anybody else has said it, is heartbroken not to be able to be here. This is his brainchild from 8 years ago, and this is our 7th iteration, and it's very much down to his energy and passion to ensure that this continues. A big thank you to the UK High Commission for your sponsorship, for bringing Matt down from Tokyo to join us, and for introducing us to the new Consul General, Sophie Warner-Fogg, who I think we'll hear from at the reception, so that's very cool. And to Katrina for her amazing and relentless guidance and phone calls and reminding me to do things I don't think I could have managed without you, to be honest. Many thanks to the EUNZ delegation and to Ambassador Meredith, our new bronze sponsor, and to Diane and their team for their commitment to our event, especially after the busyness that was the EU summit, which I got to witness firsthand, and I have no idea how you got that all together, but anyway. I also want to acknowledge Professor Jason Meeker and his panel. Jason facilitated the participation of the Dame Mirasazi Centre as the co-host of our Māori business panel, and we're really looking forward to working with the centre again in the future. And for those of you that have already received a gift, I hope you realise that it's from a Māori Pacific homegrown organisation called Tui Stationery. We've been supporting them for 5 years as part of our gifts koha to the people who participate in this course, and we're trying very hard to get them as a preferred supplier for the university, but you know, bureaucracy. I'm hoping my bosses aren't here. Okay, so finally to those who help make this happen specifically, to Rachel Meymand and to Tom Butler. I know you're here because you're really tall, and I should be able to see you. Tom, I have a wee gift for you, but you and your colleagues have been vital to providing input into the panel composition and relentlessly encouraging folks to participate, register and support us. So thank you so much. A special thanks to the event services team, Tessa, Morgan, in particular for their work over these past months, getting us to this point, but also to Jade and Johnny, who've done the mahi today. Thank you. I have gifts in here, but I won't hold people up from their drinks. I'll just give them to you a little bit later. And to Tim Page, to Jason, and to Sophie, who've assisted us with the tech, the recordings, and the photos. And so they did that last year as well, and you'll be able to find the recordings of all of these on our YouTube channel in the not too distant future. To my team, to Louise, Mohammed, Megan and Christian, who've been the best gophers a girl could have today, to the team at the Public Policy Institute, Gay and Juanita in particular, who've kept the doors open while our minds have been focused on today. And last but not least, as always, to Suzanne, who has been working with me on this event for the past 7 years, and whose input, organisational and technical skills have been constant and instrumental in ensuring the successful delivery you've all witnessed. So this wouldn't happen without her. Thank you. Come. So wine, and we just found out we both really like jigsaw puzzles. And so with that, because I know there are some cases racing out the door and some of you will be able to stay for drinks, I wish you well, a very safe trip home wherever that is. We look forward to welcoming you back next year for ATEPS 2026. Might not be in this time of the year because there might be an election, so we might just have to re-navigate when we actually hold it, but that's okay. Done that before. And before you go, just to reiterate, we have drinks, light food and music. So please hang about while we reconfigure the whale. Ngā mihi nui, kia ora, rawa atu, haere rā, mā te wā. Kia ora.